This happened back in the early 2000s, which feels like a lifetime ago now. I was working a seasonal position with the State Forestry Service while finishing up my commitment with the National Guard. The job itself was pretty straightforward. I was stationed in one of those old observation towers deep in the Cascade Mountain wilderness, basically acting as an early warning system for wildfires. My responsibility was to scan the horizon with high-powered optics, watch for smoke plumes, check for any signs of combustion in the dry season. The setup was pretty isolated. My closest colleague, a guy named Marcus, was stationed about 6 miles away in another tower. We'd check in via radio twice daily, but otherwise, I was completely on my own. The work rotation was structured so that we'd spend 10 consecutive days in the tower, then get 4 days off to head back to civilization. During those 10-day stretches, the tower was everything: bedroom, kitchen, office. There was a small utility building about a quarter mile down the trail with running water and basic facilities, but the tower itself was home. My daily routine involved the obvious monitoring duties, but also regular patrols around the surrounding area. I'd hike a perimeter, checking for unauthorized campfires, keeping tabs on the local wildlife populations, and making sure I stayed aware of where the black bears and occasional mountain lions were moving. You learn pretty quickly out there that you're a guest in their territory, not the other way around. On this particular afternoon in late August, I was doing one of my usual patrol loops when I stumbled across something that immediately set off alarm bells. Hidden under some brush, maybe 2 miles from my tower, I found a leg-hold trap. These things were completely illegal in the state forest, had been for years. The penalties for poaching on protected land were severe, or including substantial fines and potential jail time, but that didn't stop certain people from trying. I had a couple of contacts with the Ranger Enforcement Division, so I carefully triggered the trap using a long branch, then hauled the whole contraption back toward my tower to document it and turn it in on my next supply run. I was maybe halfway back when I heard the unmistakable crack of rifle fire echoing through the valley. 2 shots, maybe 3. It was hard to tell with the way sound bounced around the mountains. I picked up my pace and headed straight for the tower. We kept a hunting rifle stored up there. Standard protocol after an incident the previous spring where a spotter in the northern district had been killed by a grizzly that had climbed up into his tower. Once I got back up top, I grabbed the binoculars and spent a good 30 minutes scanning the visible terrain, but I couldn't spot anything unusual. No smoke, no movement, nothing that seemed out of place. I raised Marcus on the radio. He hadn't heard any shots from his position, but he mentioned he'd also found a couple of traps during his own patrols over the past week. We agreed to report everything to the Ranger Enforcement Office. After signing off, I tried to settle back into my normal evening routine, but I felt uneasy in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Dinner that night was canned, chili heated on my camp stove, along with some crackers and instant coffee. After I cleaned up, I sat down to write an email to my girlfriend back home. We'd gotten engaged right before I left for this rotation, and I was trying to keep her updated, even though internet access was limited to when I drove into the ranger station. I was maybe 20 minutes into writing when I heard the distinct rumble of a vehicle engine approaching. My first thought was that Marcus had decided to drive over, and he did that occasionally. We'd share coffee, trade books, just break up the monotony of the isolation. But when I looked out the tower window, I saw a dark-colored pickup truck rolling to a stop near the base of my tower, and 4 men climbed out. All of them were carrying rifles. One stayed by the truck, scanning the area, while the other 3 moved to the bed and started pulling out what I immediately recognized as more leg-hold traps. I should have grabbed the radio right then, and should have called it into Ranger Enforcement and let the professionals handle it. But I was 23 years old, grew up on a farm in rural Tennessee, and I'd already done 1 tour overseas. I thought I could handle myself. I thought I could just go down there, explain that this was protected land, and they'd pack up and leave. Looking back now, with 2 decades of perspective, I can see how incredibly stupid that was. No, I grabbed the rifle and a battery-powered lantern and headed down the metal stairs of the tower. The steps rang out with each footfall, announcing my presence. By the time I reached the bottom, all 4 men were looking directly at me. I barely managed to get out something like, "Hey, you can't be doing that here," before rough hands shoved me hard in the chest. I stumbled backward, and the lantern flew from my grip, shattering against the ground. Before I could even process what was happening, and someone kicked the rifle away from me, and then a boot connected with my stomach so hard that all the air left my lungs in one violent exhale. I doubled over, gasping, trying to pull in breath. Two of them grabbed me by the arms, hauling me upright. Nobody said a word. That was almost the worst part. The complete silence from them. They just started marching me forward, away from the tower, into the tree line. I tried to resist at first, but one of them jabbed me hard in the kidney, and the pain was so intense that my legs nearly gave out. We walked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 15 or 20 minutes. They were taking me deeper into the forest, away from the tower, away from any trail I recognized. And that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The forest was completely silent. If you've never spent significant time in wilderness areas, you might not understand how wrong that is. Forests are never truly quiet, especially at night. There's always something. Crickets chirping, owls calling, the rustle of small mammals moving through the underbrush, the distant howl of coyotes. It's a constant backdrop of sound. But right then, in that moment, there was absolutely nothing. No insects, no birds, no animal sounds whatsoever. Just our footsteps and my own ragged breathing. The silence meant that every predator and prey animal in the area had gone still, sensing danger. The entire ecosystem around us had shut down, gone into hiding, and I was the reason why. Suddenly they stopped. One of them shoved me down hard, and I fell to my knees on the forest floor. The ground was damp, and I could feel moisture seeping through my pants. My mind was racing, thinking about my parents, my younger siblings, my fiancé waiting for me back in Tennessee. I heard the metallic click of a rifle action being racked, chambering around, and I squeezed my eyes shut, or I started praying, words tumbling out in a desperate whisper. Then the night exploded with sound, but not gunfire. Sirens, multiple vehicles coming fast. I heard engines roaring, tires skidding on gravel, voices shouting commands. The hands gripping my arms released, and I heard crashing sounds as the men scattered into the brush. I stayed on my knees, shaking, unable to move. Someone was beside me then, helping me up. It was Marcus. He'd tried to radio me earlier to warn me that he'd heard a vehicle engine in my area. When I didn't respond, he'd driven over to check on me, arriving just in time to see the men forcing me into the woods. He'd immediately called ranger enforcement, who'd been patrolling nearby specifically because of the trap reports. The 4 men were apprehended within an hour. Marcus drove me back to the tower in his truck, and I sat in the passenger seat trembling, unable to make it stop. He didn't lecture me about protocol or tell me how stupid I'd been. He just said quietly, "You got lucky, kid, real lucky." I finished out that season, but I put in my notice shortly after and took a position with the Agricultural Extension Service closer to home. I never encountered another poacher during my remaining time in the tower. Marcus and I stayed in touch for a few years. I invited him to my wedding in 2003, sent him a picture when my daughter was born in 2005, but eventually, as happens with these things, we drifted apart. A few years ago, I tried looking him up online and discovered he'd passed away in 2019. He would have been in his late 70s. I never found out what happened to those 4 men, whether they served time or just paid fines. And honestly, I hope I never see any of them again. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I think about the silence in the forest, the way every living thing around us had gone still, sensing the violence in the air. Nature knew what was about to happen, even if I'd been too naive to see it coming. This memory surfaced recently, and I've been thinking about it more than I'd like to admit. It was late autumn in 2015, and I had just turned 25 a few weeks prior. My buddy Marcus and I had spent the evening at a house, gathering on the other side of town, one of those casual get-togethers that stretches way past midnight without anyone really noticing. By the time we decided to call it a night, it was pushing 4 in the morning, and the streets were completely deserted in that eerie way they get in the hours before dawn. Marcus had been my designated driver for the night since I'd had more than a few drinks, and honestly, I was grateful he'd stayed relatively sober. We pulled up in front of my building, a 3-story complex with those wrought iron gates that are supposed to make you feel secure, but mostly just squeak loudly whenever anyone opens them. The parking situation there was always terrible, and that suite ended up right on the curb, just outside the main entrance gate, under one of those sodium vapor streetlights that cast everything in a sickly orange glow. We sat there for a while, neither of us really ready to end the night. You know how it is when you're young, and the conversation is flowing. You don't want to break the spell by actually going inside and acknowledging that tomorrow exists. We were rehashing the party, laughing about this girl who tried to convince everyone she could read palms, and Marcus suggested we relax a bit more before heading up to my place. I agreed, and he started preparing his pipe. The problem was, my passenger window had been broken for about a month, the motor was shot, and I kept putting off getting it fixed because I was perpetually broke. So instead of rolling it down, I cracked open the door to let some air circulate. This, of course, triggered the interior dome light, which flooded the whole cabin with this harsh white light that made us feel like we were on display. Marcus didn't seem to mind. He was focused on what he was doing, and I was half turned in my seat, one foot on the pavement, the door propped open with my knee while I lit a cigarette. The gate to my complex was maybe 3 feet from where we'd parked, close enough that I could hear it rattling slightly in the wind. That's when I noticed movement up the sidewalk. At first, it was just a shape, all maybe 20 feet away, moving toward us with quick, purposeful strides. The streetlights were spaced far apart, so he kept passing in and out of shadow. As he got closer, I could make out more details, and something in my gut immediately told me this wasn't just some random person walking home. He was maybe 5'9", rail thin in a way that suggested malnutrition rather than genetics. He wore this bright orange hoodie that was several sizes too big, the sleeves hanging past his hands. But it was his face that really got me. Even from a distance I could tell something was off. His cheeks were sunken in, almost skeletal, and his skin had this weird weathered quality, like old leather left out in the sun too long. His facial hair grew in uneven patches, dark and wiry in some spots, with these strange bleached out sections that looked almost white under the streetlight. When he smiled, and he did smile as he approached, I could see his teeth were in terrible shape, broken and discolored. Our eyes met for just a second, and I felt this immediate primal sense of wrongness. You know that feeling when every instinct in your body is screaming at you that something is dangerous? It was like that. I should have closed the door right then. I should have told Marcus to start the car immediately, but I was sluggish from the alcohol, and my brain was processing everything a few seconds too slowly. The man stopped directly beside my open door. Just stopped, like he'd been planning to all along. "Is this my car?" he asked, his voice rough and scratchy, like he'd been screaming for hours. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could get a word out, his entire demeanor changed. "You stole my car," he screamed, suddenly lunging toward the open door. He grabbed the edge of it with one hand, but his other hand stayed buried in that oversized hoodie pocket, clearly gripping something. The way he held it, the way his arm was positioned, I knew immediately he had a weapon. Pure adrenaline took over. I threw my weight against the door, slamming it into his hand. He howled, but he didn't let go. His fingers were still wrapped around the edge, and he was trying to pull it back open. So I slammed it again, harder this time, and he finally yanked his hand away. I hit the lock button so hard I thought I might break it, but he didn't leave. Instead, he started circling around to my side of the windshield, screaming obscenities that I could hear clearly even through the closed windows. He pressed his face right up against the glass, his breath fogging it up, spittle flying from his mouth as he shouted. His eyes were wild, unfocused, and I could see now that his pupils were tiny pinpricks, definitely high on something. "Marcus, start the car," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I turned to look at him, and my stomach dropped. He was frozen, his face completely drained of color, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't get the keys into the ignition. They kept slipping, jangling against the steering column. The man had moved to the front of the car now, and that's when he pulled out a plastic bottle from his pocket. It was one of those squeeze bottles, and he immediately started spraying liquid all over the hood and windshield. The smell hit me even through the vents, sharp and chemical, lighter fluid. "Oh God," Marcus whispered. "Oh God, oh God." The man was laughing now, this high-pitched, manic sound that barely sounded human. He pulled out a metal lighter, one of those old-fashioned flip-top ones, and flicked it open. The flame caught on the first try. "This is my car," he screamed, holding the lighter up above his head like some kind of deranged Olympic torchbearer. Time seemed to slow down. I could see Marcus still fumbling with the keys, his hands completely useless from panic. I could see the flame dancing in the man's hand. I could see the liquid dripping down the windshield. Something clicked in my brain. Maybe survival instinct, maybe just clarity born from absolute terror. I reached over and grabbed Marcus's hand, steadying it, and guided the key directly into the ignition. "Drive," I said. "Drive now." Marcus turned the key and slammed his foot on the gas pedal in one motion. The tires screamed against the pavement as we lurched forward into a sharp U-turn. The man barely managed to stumble backward, and for a second I thought we might actually hit him. My shoulder crashed into the door from the momentum, and I heard something in the back seat tumble onto the floor. We rocketed down the street, Marcus pushing the car to at least 60 in a 25 zone. I twisted around in my seat, looking back through the rear window. The man was standing in the middle of the road, and I swear he was dancing, actually dancing, still holding that lighter. On the small flame visible even from a distance. We blew through 2 red lights and a stop sign, not slowing down until we'd put at least half a mile between us and my apartment. When Marcus finally pulled over in a random parking lot, I realized I was crying. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial my phone. I called my roommate Derek and tried to explain what had happened. My words came out jumbled and panicked, but he got the gist. He told me to wait 15 minutes, then come back. When we finally returned, Derek was waiting outside the gate with his concealed carry pistol visible in his waistband. He'd done a full walk around the complex and the surrounding streets, but hadn't seen anyone matching the description. We went inside, and Marcus sat on my couch for over an hour without saying a word, just staring at the wall with that same pale, shocked expression. I made us both coffee that neither of us drank. After that night, how I never parked outside the gates again. I'd circle the complex for 20 minutes if I had to, waiting for a spot to open up inside. And I got that window fixed within a week, even though it meant eating ramen for a month. I still think about that man sometimes, who he was, whether he was actually going to light that car on fire with us in it, what he had in his pocket. Part of me doesn't want to know. Part of me is just grateful that Marcus's hands finally found that ignition. I need to get this off my chest because I've been carrying it around for too long, and honestly, I don't know who else to tell. This whole situation has gotten so far out of hand that I'm losing sleep over it. Growing up, my relationship with my Uncle Marcus was never what you call normal. He raised me after my parents died when I was 7, along with my 3 older cousins, who he treated like absolute royalty. They were all athletic, academically gifted, and seemed to embody everything Marcus valued. I was the odd one out, the youngest, the quietest, the one who never quite measured up no matter how hard I tried. From the time I was around 9 or 10, I started attempting to mirror my cousins. They wake up at 5 in the morning to lift weights in the garage, so I did too. They played lacrosse, so I joined the team. They brought home honor roll certificates, so I studied until my eyes burned. But here's the thing that messed me up. No matter what I achieved, Marcus always found a reason to tell me I was failing. I remember one morning in particular, when I was about 14. I'd gone running with my cousins through the trails behind our neighborhood in Riverside. It was summer in Oregon, brutally hot even at 6 a.m., and I'd pushed myself harder than ever before. When we got back, my cousins went inside to shower, while Marcus pulled me aside. He looked at me with this expression I can only describe as disgusted, and said I wasn't pushing myself hard enough. Then he made me run another 3 miles, while he followed on his bike, and every time I slowed down, he'd reach out and pinch the back of my arm hard enough to leave marks. This became a pattern. I'd bring home a report card with perfect grades, and he'd throw it in the recycling bin and quiz me on random historical facts he thought I should know, or then berate me for hours when I couldn't answer. I won 4 consecutive awards for top performer on my lacrosse team, and Marcus attended every single game, just to tell me afterward that I'd played like I didn't care. He'd point out every mistake, every moment I wasn't running fast enough or hitting hard enough. By the time I was 16, I learned to just stop sharing anything with him. If I didn't tell him about my achievements, he couldn't tear them down. Or if I didn't show excitement about anything, he couldn't use it against me. I became a ghost in that house, moving through rooms silently, eating meals without speaking, existing in this state of constant low-level anxiety. But Marcus noticed. Of course he did. When he couldn't criticize my accomplishments anymore, he started criticizing everything else. My appearance, my lack of friends, the way I spent too much time alone, the fact that I'd gained weight, the fact that I lost weight. Nothing was ever right. The breaking point came during the fall of 2019, right after I turned 19. I'd been taking classes at the community college in Riverside and working part-time at a pharmacy. My cousins had all moved out by then. 2 were in different states, 1 was overseas, and it was just Marcus and me in that house. The tension was suffocating. One evening in November, Marcus came home from his job at the shipping warehouse and immediately started in on me. I can't even remember what triggered it. Maybe nothing. Maybe he just decided that day was the day. He told me I was wasting my life, that I was an embarrassment to the family, that my cousins had all done something with themselves by my age, and I was just taking up space. I'd heard variations of this speech 1,000 times, but something in me finally snapped. I started crying, really crying, the kind of sobbing I hadn't done since I was a kid. And Marcus just stood there watching me with this cold expression and said, "This is exactly why you're such a disappointment." I told him if he wanted me gone, I'd leave. I expected him to backtrack, to say he didn't mean it. Instead, he started throwing my belongings out the front door. Clothes, books, my laptop, everything. I spent that night in my car in a grocery store parking lot, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. The following 18 months were a blur of couch surfing, working multiple jobs, and eventually scraping together enough money to move to Denver. I found a tiny studio apartment in a sketchy part of town and got hired at 2 different restaurants. The work was exhausting. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. Nobody was watching me. Nobody was telling me I wasn't good enough. But here's where things get complicated. I'd never learned basic financial literacy. Marcus never taught me anything about money management, credit, or debt. So when I got sick with pneumonia last winter and missed 2 weeks of work, I started putting everything on a credit card. Rent, utilities, groceries, car insurance, all of it. I didn't understand how interest worked. I didn't understand that I was digging myself into a hole I couldn't climb out of. By early this year, I'd maxed out the card at nearly $5,000. The minimum payments were eating up most of my paycheck, and I was falling further behind every month. I was desperate and stupid, so I did something I swore I'd never do. I unblocked Marcus's number and called him. The conversation lasted almost 2 hours. I explained my situation, expecting him to lecture me or refuse to help. Instead, he offered to pay off my debt in installments, $500 every 2 weeks until it was cleared. In exchange, he said, we could rebuild our relationship. He said he'd been thinking about me, that he regretted how things ended, that he wanted to make things right. I wanted to believe him so badly. Despite everything, some part of me still craved his approval, still wanted him to care about me the way he cared about my cousins. So I agreed. The first payment went through, and I called him that Friday to thank him. The conversation was awkward, but not terrible. He asked about my jobs, my apartment, whether I was eating well. It almost felt normal. Then, 4 days later, my phone exploded with messages from my cousins. "Are you okay? Marcus is freaking out. He says you've been kidnapped. Please call him immediately." I was at work, completely confused. I called Marcus during my break, and he launched into this frantic story about how he'd driven to Denver, gone to both of my workplaces looking for me, and someone, he couldn't describe who, had told him I'd been taken. He said this person had used my name specifically and mentioned something about an abduction. The story made no sense. I'd been going to work every day. Nobody had approached Marcus about me. When I pressed him for details, his story kept changing, but his voice had this desperate edge to it. And against my better judgment, I felt touched, like maybe he actually cared. That's when the daily phone calls started. At first I didn't mind. We talked for 20 or 30 minutes, all mostly surface level stuff, but gradually the conversation shifted. Marcus started complaining about his life, criticizing my choices, asking invasive questions about my schedule and my coworkers. The old patterns were re-emerging. After 3 weeks of this, I finally told him I could only talk twice a week, Wednesdays and Sundays. He agreed immediately, which should have been my first warning sign. Then he added, almost casually, that if we were only talking twice a week, I should plan to visit him in Riverside, maybe stay for a weekend, maybe longer. That's when the fear really set in. Why did he want me back there? Why was he so insistent on maintaining constant contact? What was he actually getting out of this arrangement? I'm now $3,000 into his help, with about $2,000 left to go before my card is clear. And I'm trapped. I know I need to cut him off again, permanently this time. I know nothing has actually changed, but the guilt is overwhelming. He gave me money. He helped me. How can I just walk away? Except I also know I have to, because every conversation leaves me feeling drained and anxious, because he's already shown up at my workplaces once without warning, because I don't know what he's actually capable of or what he wants from me. The worst part is the control he still has over me. Even now, even after everything, I find myself checking my phone obsessively. I'm worried he's tried to call, and I've missed it. I have nightmares about him showing up at my apartment. I'm terrified he'll claim the money was a loan and try to sue me for it, even though he called it a gift. I'm an adult. I'm 21 years old. I should be able to set boundaries with a family member, but Marcus has spent my entire life breaking me down, and even hundreds of miles away, he's still in my head. I know what I have to do. I have to call him one more time and tell him we're done. I have to block his number again, maybe change my phone number entirely. I have to accept that I might never be completely free of this debt, but being in debt is better than being under his control. I just need to work up the courage to actually do it. And right now, I can barely look at his contact information without my hands shaking, but I will, soon. I have to. I've never felt so empowered and so terrified at the same time. I just needed to tell someone, to put this out into the world, so it's not just rattling around in my head anymore. Thanks for listening.